The Hanseatic League, or the Hansa as it was known, was a trading consortium formed in the 13th century. It's been described as the forerunner of the European Union, the first free trade area in the world. Any of you who have observed Brexit, either from within the UK, elsewhere in Europe, or from beyond, will recognize that there can be some challenges between political, commercial, and business, economic priorities. Add into that a few active pirates and a religious order of knights. And you can imagine that political analysts today might have quite a bit of fun dealing with all of that. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name, as you see, is Andrew Johnson. I am not an academic. So let me lay that on the line straight away. I'm a businessman. I've worked all over Europe. I ran, my background is travel, insurance, and assistance services. I ran the automobile clubs in Europe as the chief executive. We were covering some 65 million motorists in 37 different countries. And for those of you from North America, it's the European equivalent of the AAA, with whom we worked very closely, roughly similar size organizations. I am a liveryman of the City of London. Kathy and I travel with Kathy, my wife, who does a lot of the research with me. Kathy and I are members of the Lord's Taverners, which is a celebrity and sports charity that supports young people, disadvantaged young people particularly, and particularly through sport. Kathy and I originally met in Lisbon, or not far from Lisbon, 51 years ago. We've lived in Spain for the last 20 years, although we've recently moved back to the UK. And one of my books talks about the first year of our life there. I'm interested in language. I'm interested in how other people use language. And obviously, because English is my first language, my focus tends to be on how other people use English. And our friend Anthony spotted this sign in Yekaterinburg. Now, to be fair, it may have something to do with the long and very cold winters in the Urals, where they need something to compensate for it. And what about this one? Thank you to Marnie. I've lost you. Thank you to Marnie, who spotted this romper suit in a baby shop window in Dover on Saturday. And in case you can't read it, it's designed like a prison outfit, and it says just done 9 months inside. I think that's brilliant. So let me start with a map of the Hansa. I'm going to head up here to try to put some context into this. This is England, the United Kingdom. This is France, Belgium, the Netherlands. Today, this is Germany, Poland, and so on. Here we have Denmark, Norway, Sweden. The colored parts on that map, at some time or another, were part of the Hanseatic League. It continued for some 300 years, and its influence spread from England in the west to modern-day Lithuania and Russia in the east. And its network of alliances grew to almost 200 cities, and it protected its interests from interfering rulers and rival traders using a powerful fleet financed by its members. Let's move that map across to look at the map of this cruise, and for some of you who were with us last week, the previous cruise as well. Most of this area has had influences from the Hansa over time, and we left Dover, which through London has Hansa links. Yesterday we were in Antwerp, today in Rotterdam, active areas here. And this part of the journey is particularly impacted upon, and the rest of it, not just by Hansa, but by the reaction of others to the Hansa. Now, I'm going to apologize for this because this isn't how Vikings looked, but I want to take you back very briefly to the Nordic sea raiders who we refer to as Vikings. The captain and I have a sort of arrangement. Whenever he wants to talk, I shut up. Seems easier that way, really, doesn't it? So where was I? Oh yes. So Kathy, my wife, who works with me on producing some of these, has Scandinavian blood, and so her contribution to these talks often pays tribute, or at least includes reference, to her Viking forebears and the expansion of their control by sea, the Sea Raiders. And their influence stretched from the Americas to Constantinople. The Hanseatic League was formed partly in defense from these almost mythical warriors, their exploratory trading adventures, raids, piracy, which occurred regularly throughout the Baltic region and beyond, up to about the 10th century. But, and I emphasize, the horned helmets that we all believe they wore were not worn, perhaps occasionally, by Vikings. They tended to wear something much simpler than that. They weren't worried about the flamboyant stuff. But back to the Hansa. As I said in my introduction, it was a commercial and defensive confederation of merchant guilds, market towns in northern and central Europe. It grew from a few North German towns in the late 1100s. The League came to dominate Baltic maritime trade for 3 centuries along the coasts of northern Europe. And you can see in this map that the various towns were quite widely spread geographically. And so they weren't always on the same side in national and international disputes. And some cities came into the League very reluctantly. But because trade was the key, the Hansa could always persuade others that their way was advantageous. because it was. So let's start with a definition, explanation. Hansa is an old High German word for a band or a troop. The word was applied to bands of merchants traveling between the Hanseatic cities, whether they traveled by land or by sea. Hanse came to mean a society of merchants or a trader guild. I will be mentioning Kontor. These are the outposts of the League, and the word is derived from the German Kontor and the French comptoir, which come from the Latin computare, which is to calculate or to compute. And a word that has been used in various forms to describe an office or a location or a working base. And it continues to mean office in Dutch and several Scandinavian languages, even in Estonian, which is a very different language. But I will say, definitely not either of those offices. If you watch the TV series, either the American one or the British one, you will realize that they probably weren't the basis for anything successful at all. So a contour, foreign trading post, but not a member of the Hanseatic League, and the four main contours were London, Bruges, well, I should say London, we departed from Dover, a port for London, on Saturday, Bruges, where many of you visited yesterday from Antwerp, Bergen in the west coast of Norway, and Novgorod, which is today Peterhof in Russia. Of all the contour buildings, really, in any delightful form, the only ones that exist are these in Bergen, known as the Bruggen. They've survived pretty well intact until the present day. And you probably already know. You will know, I'm sure, that Seabourn has a long-standing relationship with UNESCO, with close ties over time, and Bergen's contour is on the UNESCO list of World Cultural Heritage Sites. The Hanseatic cities had their own legal systems. They operated their own armies for protection and aid, and they cooperated to protect one another. But the League is not a single state. It didn't have its own government. It didn't have its own army. So let's just point out a few of the key cities. And Novgorod here, which I say is Peterhof today, right in Russia, I will come back to that. Visby here, on Sweden's Gotland, and Lübeck here. Those three were really very important to the development of the Hansa, but actually others, of course, played a role. At the start of the rise of the Hanseatic League, the area was dominated by the Holy Roman Empire, a multi-ethnic complex of territories in Europe. It developed during the early Middle Ages and continued until its dissolution at the beginning of the 19th century because of the Napoleonic Wars. The largest territory on the empire was the Kingdom of Germany. More definitions. Within the Holy Roman Empire, the term free and imperial city was used to denote a self-ruling city that had a certain amount of autonomy and was represented in the imperial diet or council. An imperial city was subordinate only to the Holy Roman Emperor, as opposed to a territorial city or town, which was subordinate to a territorial prince, or an ecclesiastical lord, someone with church powers. The queen of the Hansa was Lübeck. I showed you on a map just now. I will show you again in a little while. Here, traders transshipped goods between the North Sea and the Baltic. It gained imperial privileges to become a free imperial city in 1226. Today, the Kiel Canal, and we will be traveling through the Kiel Canal next Tuesday. Today, the Kiel Canal serves as the direct route for ships, avoiding the need to travel all the way around Denmark. in those days, to A, be safer, and B, be quicker, goods were taken across the Jutland Peninsula, and Lübeck was the trading centre for all of that. And after it was made a free city in 1226, Lübeck was able to develop what became known as Lübeck law. The law provides for self-government. It replaced the personal rule of tribal monarchs descending from ancient kings, and the dukes and the kings had less power, those established by Charlemagne, for example, and the traders themselves, the guilds that they created, were able to have much more power and control over their trade. Now, this modern map shows just how well situated Lübeck is, because if you look at the blue line immediately above Lübeck, between the North Sea and the Baltic, that's the Kiel Canal, and we will be transiting that next week. Before that was built in the last century, to achieve the same thing, things had to go across land, and that was the role that Lübeck performed. Eventually, about 100 of the cities adopted a government based on Lübeck law, and it still serves as a foundation today for a number of German town laws in many of those cities. German towns in particular were dominated by great merchant families. That was true in a lot of European towns. So it's not surprising that from the beginning of the 13th century, there appeared associations of cities with the purpose of the removal of obstacles to trade. I mentioned at the beginning, I am a freeman of the City of London. The freedom of the City of London was established by William the Conqueror in 1067 to remove obstacles to free trade. And that was one of Hanse's main objective. As early as 1210, Lübeck and Hamburg agreed that a common law obtained between them, and in 1241, a formal alliance to secure common action against robbers and pirates was established. Because whenever we think of pirates, we tend to think of perhaps modern-day Somalia or something out in Southeast Asia, or the pirates of the Spanish Main. And indeed, I was talking about those last week. But the pirates around these waters were active and dangerous, and the Hanseatic League helped to protect against them. Officially, the free and Hanseatic city of Hamburg, where many of us regrettably will have to leave this beautiful vessel, the official name reflects Hamburg's history as a member of the League and a free imperial city of the Holy Roman Empire. Before the unification of Germany in 1871, it was a fully sovereign city-state and later formed a civic republic. There have been a number of disasters that Hamburg has had to face. There was the Great Fire of Hamburg, an awful North Sea flood in 1962, and there were, of course, the impacts of military conflicts during especially the Second World War. The city has managed to recover, and I hope you managed to get enough time to get in and to explore, because it has come back after each of those catastrophes. But back to the 15th century, and I'll take you back to this map, and I don't apologize for taking you back, because the major contores, the smaller trading posts of the Hansa, spread throughout northern Central Europe and the British Isles. Effectively from London in the west to Veliki Novgorod in the east, and from Trondheim in the north to Frankfurt further south. They dominated trade far beyond German-speaking regions and far beyond the cities where Lübeck law was in force. Meanwhile, on the Swedish side of the Baltic is the Gotland town of Visby, which I showed you on the map just now. This is honing in on Sweden. You can see Copenhagen in the bottom there, Gothenburg above it on the Swedish side, and over on the east side of Sweden is the island of Gotland and the town of Visby. And it had functioned as the leading trading centre in the Baltic from before the time of the Hansa. Huge coin hoards have been found in Gotland that originated from the Arab world and Central Asia, testifying to the town's early importance in international trade. Visby merchants had established the trading post at Novgorod in modern-day Russia as early as the middle of the 11th century. They named it Gutagard. Later, in the first half of the 13th century, merchants from northern Germany also established their own trading station in Novgorod, which we know as Peterhof today. This gave them a major link across Russia to the Silk Road from the east. And if you were with me last week, you will know how important it was to get action and into the Silk Road with some degree of control. In the second half of the 13th century, the burghers of Visby, then part of Sweden, built a mighty barrier to keep peasants out. They wanted to protect the wealth that international trade was bringing to their town from across the Baltic Sea. And trading took place with privileged merchants, not with the farmers who were settled nearby. And in 1361, Gotland was conquered by Valdemar IV of Denmark. 1,800 Gotlanders were killed in battle in front of the city. Valdemar tore down part of the wall, set up 3 huge beer barrels, and threatened to turn men loose to pillage the whole town unless those beer barrels were filled with silver and gold. The Visby city fathers fulfilled the demand, raided the churches and everything else in the town, including their own valuables, and filled those to protect themselves and their people. And Valdemar added the title King of Gotland to a fairly lengthy title list. But his treatment of Visby, now a member of the Hanseatic League, precipitated the League into a direct conflict with Denmark. And Valdemar was eventually forced into various concessions, but he retained Visby as a Danish city. Other factors challenged Gotland's dominant position. Piracy, I've mentioned already, improved navigation, ships that could travel further and faster, and continuing military attacks from Denmark. Visby couldn't control what it had created, and it was eventually bypassed completely. The cooperation between various merchants pioneered in Gotland had grown gradually into an organized network, a medieval trading superpower, and one of the big prizes of Baltic trade at the time was the skin of this poor chap, the humble Russian squirrel. Huge, huge consignments of squirrel skins were exported from Novgorod to meet the insatiable demand for fur-trimmed cloaks and other fashionable garments. Visby had the trading monopoly with Novgorod, and it prospered. But then Germany came in, settled in Novgorod, and slowly took over the trade. Just what's happened elsewhere. As well as furs, cloth, fine cloth, was one of the other most traded items, as were candles. Castles, homes of the time, churches, business enterprises needed candles to be able to see. And originally they were produced from tallow, which is a rather pungently smelling animal fat, and the wealthy would pay a premium to get beeswax candles because they had a much more pleasant aroma. By the 13th century, candle making had become a guild craft, a specialist, trained, professional, apprenticed craft. The Tallow Chandlers' Company of London was formed in about 1300, and Kathy and I have dined in Tallow Chandlers' Hall. And the Wax Chandlers' Company acquired its charter at the end of the 15th century, and this is the crest of the Wax Chandlers' Company of the City of London. Veliki Novgorod, or generally referred to as Novgorod, which means new town, is one of the oldest and most important historic cities in Russia, with more than 1,000 years of history. It lies along the Volkhov River, just downstream from its outflow from Lake Ilmen, and is situated on the highway connecting Moscow and St. Petersburg. UNESCO, who I mentioned earlier, recognized Novgorod as a World Heritage Site back in 1992, and at its peak during the 14th century, the city was the capital of the Novgorod Republic and one of Europe's largest cities. And the Republic was a medieval state that existed for 3 centuries until the 15th century, stretching from the Gulf of Finland over in the west to the northern Ural Mountains in the east, where my friend spotted that drunken pedestrian sign. It was the Baltic end of the Silk Road, so it was a hugely important trade route and a very important asset for the Hanseatic League. From the eastern outposts, as I say, it all stretched right across to London in the west. The earliest documentary evidence in London of a specific German commercial federation dates from 1157. The merchants of the Hansa in Cologne convinced King Henry II of England to exempt them from all tolls in London and allow them to trade at fairs throughout England. London was never one of the formally adopted Hanseatic cities, but it was a crucial link in the chain. It was known as a kontor, a trading post, as I've explained. The community of German merchants who lived on the banks of the River Thames were exempt from customs duties and certain other taxes due to the freedom of the City of London. The League's London base was known as the Steel Yard, and as best we can judge, that is probably because of the metal seals that were used to certify the origin of certain types of cloth that were bought here for export. Their reputation for reliability was such that it's often been suggested that the UK currency, sterling, was a shortened form of Easterling, the local name for the Hanseatic traders. So when merchants in England wanted to be sure of probity, people that they trusted, they would deal in a currency that was trusted. And merchants in England wanted to be paid in Easterling pounds, and that was a sense that something they could rely upon. And none of its buildings, the warehouses, chapel, Guildhall or residential quarters remain, but their presence is revealed in place names. Steelyard Passage, which runs under Cannon Street Station on the north side of the River Thames, or Pelt Trader Pub beneath a railway arch in the same area. It's opposite Skinner's Hall, where the fur trade was based, and the Pelt Trader had used that name as a reminder of one of the most important Hanseatic imports into London. Thousands of commuters pass through London's Cannon Street Station every day, but I bet most of them aren't aware that the site once housed one of the most important trading centres in medieval Europe. Behind the station, on the banks of the River Thames, a street sign, Hanseatic Walk, gives a clue to the wealthy merchants who once dominated the area. The last surviving Hanseatic building in England is a brick warehouse on the banks of the great River Ouse in King's Lynn, which is not far from Norwich in East Anglia between Norfolk and Lincolnshire. there are old letters from German merchants in London saying how well they were treated in Lynn. The Germans had a favourite pub, which was a large inn there called the Swan. Over the past few years, those links have been reborn as towns across Europe have created a network called the New Hanseatic League, or the Hansa. King's Lynn was the first British town to join. Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Boston and Hull are among the other British members. And the Hansa can, for example, put a specialist flooring company in King's Lynn in touch with timber merchants in Estonia or Latvia in much the same way that they could help traders to cooperate and come together in the past. But back to the history. The League didn't have it all their own way, not by any means. The Company of Merchant Adventurers of London was a trading company founded in the City of London in the early 15th century. Its members' main business was exporting cloth, especially white undyed broadcloth, in exchange for a large range of foreign goods. It traded in northern European ports and it competed directly with the Hanseatic League. During the 14th century, Queen Margaret I of Denmark was battling Albert of Mecklenburg for Scandinavian supremacy. Albert had been King of Sweden since 1364 and was also the Duke of Mecklenburg. The Whittle brothers were a loosely organized guild of privateers, and he employed them, and they later turned from something official in privateering to something far more for far more personal gain, and became proper outright pirates. They impacted maritime trade in both the North and the Baltic Seas. Their main enemy in 1392 was the Hanseatic town of Lübeck, which supported its neighbour Denmark in the war. But apart from Lübeck, the rest of the Hanseatic League initially supported the Whittle brothers and Sweden. And as a result, the Hansa was starting to get divided. The towns didn't want Denmark to be victorious because it's such an important location. They didn't want to cede that control to Denmark. But Queen Margaret and Denmark gained the upper hand politically. She formed the Kalmar Union. This was agreed at Kalmar in Sweden, and it ran from the end of the 14th century into the 16th century, joining together under a single monarch the three kingdoms of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, which then included most of present-day Finland as well. And after the defeat of the Whittle brothers, the Hanseatic League tried repeatedly but unsuccessfully to completely control the Baltic Sea. A number of the Whittle brothers remained at sea as pirates, and the successors gave themselves the name Likkedeelers, which, excuse my pronunciation, but it effectively means equal sharers. So the idea was that whoever was involved would get a share of the booty that could be gained, and they would share it with the coastal populations. Now, I mentioned before the Hanseatic League had no army, but they did have the support of the Order of Teutonic Knights. Like the better-known Knights Templars or the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, the Teutonic Knights were members of a military order born out of the Crusades. Unlike the other orders, which were also longer established, the Teutonic Order maintained a distinct national identity, which connected it with Germany and led it eventually to focus its efforts on its operations in the Baltic region. There, the order conducted crusades against the Baltic pagans and founded a feudal state, eventually becoming the sole ruler of Prussia and Livonia. Today, the Bailiwick of Utrecht of the Teutonic Order is a Protestant chivalric order, and it's descended from the same medieval military order and continues to award knighthoods and to perform charitable works. And when Kathy and I were living and working in Brussels, I worked very closely with colleagues here in the Netherlands, and the chief executive of our Dutch organization, a gentleman by the name of Paul Nouwen, was a knight of the Protestant chivalric order, the bailiwick of Utrecht. Now, the histories of the Hanse and the Teutonic Order were deeply intertwined, almost from their beginnings. The Hanse provided ships and support for the order's conquest of Prussia in the mid-13th century, and in turn, the Teutonic Knights provided protection for the merchants of the Hanse. And the Hanse's workhorse ships really weren't designed for fighting. They were small cargo ships. This is a wooden cog. It's the distinctive Hanse ship with its square-rigged single sail. It was developed for the burgeoning trade routes across the Baltic and was, in effect, a very early forerunner of the modern-day cargo ships that we see trading up and down today. And the image is still used, as you can see, on the coat of arms of the city of Wismar, where we will be next week. Yesterday, a number of you went to Bruges. Some of you even live there. And Bruges is the largest city in the province of West Flanders in the Flemish region of Belgium, more correctly called Brugge because it's in Flanders. It's in the northwest of the country, and it is the 7th largest city in Belgium by population. The historic city centre is another World Heritage Site, a very prominent one in UNESCO's listings. It's had a checkered history with the League. As a contour of the League, it wasn't always in harmony with Lübeck because it was quite a strong trading post on its own. Bruges had a strategic location at the crossroads of the northern Hanseatic League trade and the southern trade routes. It was always included in the circuit of the Flemish and French cloth fairs at the beginning of the 13th century. But when the old system of fairs broke down and entrepreneurs of Bruges recognized that they had to innovate, and they developed or borrowed from Italy perhaps, new forms of merchant capitalism, whereby several merchants would share the risks and profits and pool their knowledge of markets. At the start of the 16th century, the League found itself in a weaker position than it had known for many years. The rising Swedish Empire had taken control of much of the Baltic Sea. Denmark had regained control over its own trade. The contour in Novgorod had closed, and the contour in Bruges had effectively become moribund because the tradesmen of Bruges no longer saw the need. And the individual cities making up the League had also started to put self-interest before the common Hanseatic interest. Finally, the political authority of the German princes had started to grow, constraining the independence of the merchants and the Hanseatic towns. The Bruges contour moved to Antwerp, where we were yesterday, and the Hanse attempted to pioneer new routes. However, the League proved unable to prevent the growing mercantile competition, and so a long decline began. The Antwerp contour closed in 1593, followed by the London contour 5 years later. The Bergen contour continued until the middle of the 18th century, and as I've said, of all the contours, its buildings, the Bruggen, are the only ones that survive today. So to what extent can the Hanseatic League be seen as a forerunner of today's European Union? Some academics claim that their whole strategy was about creating monopolies and negotiating privileges. What the League didn't have, of course, was the kind of political and economic structures that we now associate with the EU. But on the other hand, they created a network and developed prosperity at a time when the Baltic was a bleak place commercially. So the transformation that they helped to generate was the origin of the prosperity of northwestern Europe. The League certainly did intervene at times in politics. It supported some monarchs against others. It imposed trade boycotts and it fought wars. But it was in order to keep the trade routes open. That was the reason that they did those things. And in that sense, it was about freedom to trade rather than free trade that they survived. The new Hanseatic League, or the Hansa, also called Hanseatic League 2.0, was established just 6 years ago by European finance ministers from Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Ireland, Latvia, Lithuania, the Netherlands, and Sweden, through the signing of a 2-page foundational document that set out the shared views and values on the discussion of the architecture of the economic and monetary union of the EU. The group sees clubbing together as a way to make up for the loss of the like-minded United Kingdom in the European political arena after Brexit. And the countries involved want a more developed European single market, particularly in the services sector. A large number of Scots are pushing again for independence. You might remember there was a referendum there in 2014 and the independence lobby lost that vote. In the Brexit referendum 2 years later, the Scots voted very, very significantly to stay in Europe. And because of the decision imposed by London, Scotland was taken out of Europe along with the rest of the UK. And they argue that London's focus has always been south and west, so looking to France, Germany, and beyond, and to the United States in their trade developments. And that Scotland has a much closer interest to the peoples and trade of Scandinavia. And so there are some who would suggest that if Scotland were to become independent, they might consider themselves a Nordic country. And if so, they might join the Nordic Council, a possibility. So the Hanseatic League was a powerful economic and defensive alliance that left a great cultural and architectural heritage. It's especially renowned for its brick Gothic monuments. For example, the Church of St. Nikolai in Stralsund. And Stralsund is a North German city on the Baltic. If you were to draw a line from Berlin to Stockholm, you'd pretty much go through Stralsund at the Baltic. And the church and the city hall here on the German Baltic coast are just perfect examples of the architectural legacy of the Hanseatic League. And again, UNESCO lists the old town of Stralsund, together with Wismar, as a World Heritage Site. Maybe Hansa is a past. It may have an important key for us for the future. Only time will tell. But I hope you're going to enjoy visiting more of these places that have thrived thanks to the Hanseatic League. I'm going to be back tomorrow morning, and I'm going to look at the development of the Nordic and Scandinavian areas of our itinerary. But for now, I think it's only fair to let you go to dinner. Kathy and I are here. We are around, and we're delighted to carry on conversations or to answer any questions. Thank you very much for joining us.